So I tend to do the things that I want to do, even if I don't know I like doing them.
What was your reason to quit your high-paying job?
I'm not necessarily losing out in terms of income. FAANG or Airbnb or Spotify or, Paytm or maybe a non-tech company. I think it's not abnormal to be making somewhere in that range of like 80 to 120K.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Learning Bridge. I hope you guys are doing good and staying safe. So this podcast is going to be one of the most awaited collaboration on my YouTube channel, because I have invited someone who is already in the data engineering space. And one interesting fact, I left one of the FAANG companies, that was Amazon, and in the same month he left one of the most popular FAANG company, that was Facebook. So we both belong to data engineering space and we both quit the FAANG companies. So in today's podcast, we will be discussing about that one. What was my reason? What was his reason? And most important, to help the data engineering community, he will be sharing his perspective about the same, sharing his experience with the data engineering, even talking about the interviews, what you need to study, what you need to prepare. And he will also talk about his interview experience for the data engineer at Facebook, so that it can help you in your preparation. And there will be amazing conversation related to data engineering, salary, roadmap in India, USA, and some more cool stuff. So make sure to watch this podcast till the very end, because this is going to be super informative. And if you find it informative and worth listening, then make sure to like it in the big numbers. And if you're watching any of my video for the very first time, then kill the subscribe button plus the notification icon for such amazing content. And thanks to CrioDo for building such a lovely platform which actually believes in learning by doing. So if you are someone who want to crack some really good top-notch companies in software engineering domain, like backend developer, front-end developer, full stack developer, and you feel that you are lacking in top tech skills which are demanded in the industry, and you don't have some really good real world projects in your resume, then this is the platform you should actually look for. They literally focus on top demanded skills in the industry and real world projects. So I have shared that link in the description. Go check that out. Amazing surprises for you. This is the CrioDo platform. Free trial is available for everything. First you can observe, then you can take your decision. And the success of their alumni actually speaks for them, that the kind of value Cryo has added in their career. And here are the courses they are offering, like full stack developer, backend developer, fellowship program in software development. So here you can see all the important information, like what kind of tool and tech stack they will be following, what kind of and how many projects you will be working on. So all these details I'll mention here. You can check it out. And this is amazing fellowship program where even you will get the placement guarantee. So you can use the link which is in the description. It will help you to get extra discount along with the scholarship. Just check out the CrioDo platform and shape your career beautifully. So thank you so much, Ben, for joining my podcast. And I think, yes, this was one of the collaboration I was waiting for. And he's also known as the Seattle data guy. He's having his own YouTube channel helping the data engineering community, and that's why I wanted to bring him on my YouTube channel. And the interesting topic will be like, why did he even quit the FAANG? Because some time back I also quit the Amazon, which was one of the FAANG companies, and there will be a lot of interesting discussion between me and Ben. So really excited for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Hey everyone, my name is Ben. Basically, I originally started kind of my journey into data as an information systems kind of student, working a lot with like databases and things of that nature. My first job was at a hospital, kind of doing project analysis, but I did a ton in like data warehouse engineering. And that's kind of where I really started to learn about that kind of side of things in terms of like data. Because when I first started, I think like many people, I saw data science and I was really interested by that. Eventually started working at a healthcare startup that did a lot of data engineering and kind of processed tons and tons of like healthcare data. And that's where I learned a lot more in terms of like ETLs and things of that nature, and how to process large data sets. And then from there, I think that kind of gave me a solid foundation to kind of start a job where I worked at Facebook. And then also at the same time had like a consulting company where I would help companies kind of modernize their data stacks. So that's a quick intro about me.
First, I would like to touch upon the data engineering side. So how did you come to know about the data engineering specification? Because in the industry, there are a lot of things in the under the umbrella of big data, right? So what did actually excite you to pick it as a career option?
Yeah. And I started to almost allude to earlier, when I first started, I was actually somewhat interested in like data science, right? I think a lot of people come to data with that in mind, because they're like, oh, this is interesting. There's lots of articles about it. And so, I started like doing tons of research about that, learning all of the different like algorithms and all of that for data science. And then eventually, like as I was doing kind of the work, I realized I just liked the engineering aspect a lot more. Like I liked building things. I liked building data pipelines. I liked building like automated systems more than I liked just doing analysis. So I think that's kind of what eventually started pushing me more towards data engineering. Was I just started to find myself doing that work anyways. And so I like to tell people, like, I vote with my feet. So I tend to do the things that I want to do, even if I don't know I like doing them. So, it's just like eventually you realize, oh, I'm still doing this thing. I really like this aspect, right? Like the ETLs, automation, handling distributed systems aspect of it more than I like the analysis component. So I think that's kind of how I ended up doing it, right? Like I think a lot of people start on the data science side because there's a lot of stuff out there content wise, and then eventually they eventually find that maybe they don't like it, or there's maybe not the right role for them, and then they find data engineering and they're like, oh, this is actually kind of what I was expecting, something that's a little more software engineering like-esque. But I think that's kind of how I came about it.
So people who know that I have also recently quit the FAANG company, Amazon, and Ben also quit his the popular FAANG company, Facebook. So, and we both are as data engineers. So in one of my videos, I have explained my reason to quit FAANG and what was the reason behind it. But Ben, I would also like to know it from you, that you have worked in Facebook almost 3 years. What was your reason to quit your high-paying job as a data engineer, that too from Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the reason I quit was I also have been doing consulting for a while, and that I just got really busy. Honestly, I just got to the point where I was really busy in doing that kind of work, and there was no way I could balance both. I just got to that point where I was like, okay, I have to pick, and so that's why I ended up quitting. I no longer could manage everything, and I need to find a way to I either basically had to pick, do I want to go through the route of getting promoted internally at Facebook, and go through all the effort there, because there's for anyone who's worked, I mean, especially I think at a FAANG where it's very specific, and there in a weird way there are clear routes to get promoted, but it takes a lot of work. It just would take a huge commitment. And so it's either I commit to getting promoted or I commit to trying to make consulting work. And so I just had to make that trade-off. I was very fortunate because obviously I have something afterwards. I'm not necessarily losing out in terms of income. This isn't a risk for me, at least not a huge risk. Obviously I could stop getting clients, which that would be difficult. But other than that, there's a lot of work in the data engineering space. So I'm pretty confident I will have work for a while.
Cool. So interesting point, right? So are you making good money from your consulting firm, and is it matching or even more than the your salary which were at the Facebook?
Yeah. I mean, in financially, it's definitely on par, if not occasionally, has the opportunity to exceed what I was doing. So yeah, that's the thing. It's there's it really is a good opportunity if you know how to do more than just consult, because I think that's the hard thing with consulting. It's it's not just the technical aspect. It is a lot of the business side, which that took some time. Probably for the first, or the reason that I was able to kind of even make this decision was I kind of had to repackage a lot of what I was doing. Prior to this, I was taking on almost any project, and even smaller projects I'd take on. And then you eventually realize it's okay, if I take 2 or 3 projects on, even if they're small, I can only manage so much mentally, right? It's more every new project takes up an automatic partition in your brain almost, it feels like. And so even if you think you could take on 10 projects at a certain cost, it's even if it's small, it's just an extra thing that you're thinking about. So the big thing that changed was how I was packaging things, how I was pricing things, how I was telling people how I was going to deliver value and what value I was driving. So that's really kind of the differentiator now.
Also, I would like to know from you guys as well that what you think if someone gets into the FAANG companies, so whether it would be a great decision to quit it or not. And yes, you can let me that thing in the comment section. So moving on to the next question, Ben. So do you also think that FAANG is overrated nowadays, because so many amazing product-based companies out there, and even startups which are providing challenging job roles, interesting work, along with higher pay scale? So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of opportunities outside of the FAANG, and honestly, whenever I say FAANG and whenever I reference it in a video, I generally mean FAANG or Airbnb or Spotify or Paytm or there's a whole host of other top tech companies that I think, at this point are still kind of under that umbrella, right? There's a lot of good opportunities for companies that are trying to solve difficult problems. So I do think there's a big opportunity there outside of, just the classic, five, that will be just as difficult or just as fun, or provide just as much income. It's the hard thing here is it's hard to then put an acronym around it, I think. So that's why for me, it's even when I reference FAANG, it's or any other top tech company, because I think we know, we're generally aware of a top tech company, based off of kind of, what they do, kind of their service, what they provide, and maybe how big of a service they provide. If it's an application and it's, they've got billions of users or something, we know that they are a big thing. We know that the data behind that is going to be difficult to manage. So yeah, I think, I don't know if overrated is the word, but it's definitely there are other options now. I think the other thing that some people come to realize when they work at a FAANG or something that has a mature data infrastructure is it might not be as fun as you think. Only in terms of the fact that I think as engineers, we like to build things, we like to solve complex problems, and a lot of that groundwork has been built out at most of these companies because they are mature. They have been around for a while, so their data infrastructure is much farther along than most other companies. So if you're going to a company and you want to solve really complex problems, it's going to be a different set of problems at a FAANG, where it's going to be much more business focused and a lot less technical focused. So that's always something that I think people find difficult if they came in assuming that they're going to be directly doing Presto under the hood kind of work, and then they find that they're doing SQL queries, and that's oh, this is not what I wanted to do.
Given a choice between the startups and the top FAANG companies, what would you prefer? Let me know in the comments. So moving on to the next question, Ben. So I think this will be related more towards the data engineering side, since you have spent a lot of time on that domain. So if someone wants to prepare for data engineering interview, and as you said, now let's don't refer FAANG only, FAANG including plus top tech companies, as you also mentioned, then what all things they need to prepare? What will be the expectation from the candidates during the interview process? And I think it would be great if you can throw some light on your Facebook interview experience, because that can help a lot of candidates who are targeting such kind of companies.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally what I tell people is, you're going to need to do generally some programming of some kind. That's dependent on the place you go to interview. I tell people, if you're going to go interview at Facebook, if you know Python, that's going to be the best for you. We always joked at Facebook that basically Python has kind of almost privilege, Python privilege, because if you use that to try to go through an interview, it's going to be much easier, right? You're not going to spend as much time initializing things, and I've been through a few people who do Java interviews, and most of them don't get very far. If you were to do the numbers, I'm sure you'd see that people who use Java instead of people who use Python are just less likely to pass. And it might not be that they're logically not going to have the right code. It's just that there's so much other setup that you've got to do. So, where a Python person could answer the first question in a minute, you might still be doing the same question 5 minutes later because you're still oh, I forgot to do this one semicolon somewhere or something. Yeah. So that's just a little bit of advice. SQL, of course. So I usually tell people to go, in this case, there's plenty of opportunities or sites these days to practice SQL on. Interview Query, I think, has some really good SQL questions, as does Scratch. I've kind of gone through both, and I really like their questions. They've done a good job of imitating questions that you will get at a FAANG or another tech company. So SQL is always important. In fact, with my experience at Amazon, it was much heavier on the SQL and database side when I went to interview with them versus any coding. So that's why I usually tell people it's you definitely need SQL, data modeling, both in terms of data warehousing as well as database, classic third normal form kind of data modeling is generally also important. And I think those are kind of the three key areas. You might be asked to do some ETL development, just kind of designing an ETL. There might be, depending on the company you work for, some questions around like distributed systems, but those are, I think, less likely.
Okay.
I think the core tends to be coding, SQL, and data modeling, data warehousing, and then the other stuff around that. It just depends on the company that you're going to go interview for. So I generally say focus on those three first, and then the other stuff around it, it's going to be dependent on, hey, which company are you interviewing for? Look up what they usually ask and make sure you're ready for those questions, because everyone asks slightly different styles of questions and slightly different like topics as well.
How much importance the cloud tech stack will have during these interviews? Like, do companies even prioritize anything related to cloud tech stack? Okay, if this candidate knows cloud well, then probably we should shortlist him, or any kind of thing like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the one hard thing there is because I worked at Facebook, right? Like our cloud was an internal thing, right? Like we did not have, we didn't use a lot of cloud technology. Like because we had our own essentially, right? Like what they explained to us is like, you have to think that like when AWS was setting up AWS, Facebook was dealing with the problems that AWS was setting up to solve their own selves, right? Because like Amazon built a lot of those tools for themselves to solve their big data problems. Facebook was coming up at the same time, and there was no cloud. There was them, and so they had to build a lot of their own solutions. And so in a weird way, we didn't have the traditional cloud. We had a lot of similar tools. Like if you were to go into Facebook, you could point to a lot of similar things. But it wouldn't be, you're not spinning up an EC2 instance. You're just spinning up your own local dev server.
Okay.
So I think it's very important. I think in general, you need one cloud. I'm generally going to always say like AWS or GCP, unless you're going into a Microsoft shop. But I see a lot of AWS and GCP around. Usually pick one. And if you're solid in one, I'd hope that the hiring manager isn't going to ding you because you don't know their stack, because they're all kind of the same once you work with them. They all have some sort of analogous pair on the other side, right? It's like, cloud storage or, whatever, S3 or, cloud compute or EC2. It's all kind of the same.
A lot of people are still confused about the data engineering because of the hype of data science and AI/ML. And they want to become good data engineer and good data scientist at the same time. And trust me, I've been getting lot of queries, and even I have seen lots of like LinkedIn profiles where people are mentioning everything, that data engineering, data science, machine learning, everything. So what's your thought on this, right? And would you like to clarify something for the same? If you see there is any gap, and people are not understanding data engineering in a correct way, and they are still confused with all the noises in the market.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always going to be a lot of noise, and I think, data engineering, I think, will always be the less cool sibling or whatever you want to call it in terms of this data world. Even if it's like popular in terms of like, seeing billions of dollars go into companies that are focused around data engineering in terms of like startups and a lot more jobs in the area, I think it's just, again, it's just less exciting work, right? Like we're not the person that's like developing the algorithm that's going to, predict what ad you're going to click. We're the person that sets up all this data. And I think it's hard to become really good at both, like at the same time. Like maybe like later in your career, sure, you can start like picking up more, but I think in order to be good at data engineering, there's a lot of tools and technologies to learn, and to follow all the best practices, and then to also gain the experience to like know how to actually like implement those best practices. I think it's really hard to do that, and AI and data science, because they're both two very difficult subjects, I'd say. So I think sometimes at a company, you might kind of be forced to play a little bit of both, right? Like if you're at a startup, sure. But I think even then, it's going to be really hard for you to implement either well, because again, you're just trying to get things done, which is very different than like trying to do things the right way. So I think it would be very difficult to learn both at the same time. I understand they're both very interesting. I think, build a solid foundation in one, and then if you really are interested, then you can maybe start looking at the other. But I think there's plenty of money to be made doing either or, and yeah, if you want to learn both, it's a lot of time, and I'm just curious. Like, it's like I don't know if it's going to give you the ROI you think it is. So yeah, I'd say build a foundation in one first. Make sure you feel really comfortable. Get to that senior level, and then if you feel like you have free time, if you feel like there's nothing else you could possibly learn in that subject, or there's nothing else you want to learn, then yeah, sure. Maybe you want to try to become more hybrid, and then eventually become like more of like a tech lead. In that route where you're like deciding how to design systems versus like just how to like do this kind of code, like just code essentially.
Let's say somebody wants to start with data engineering, because in the beginning this is the real big challenge for the fresh grads itself, and even for the working professionals who are trying to move from different job profiles to data engineering. So as a baby step, what all things you would suggest to them that yes, follow these things as a first version of your data engineering roadmap?
Yeah, and I usually tell people here, like if they want to learn data engineering, right, like they got to generally start with a baseline foundation of like programming, SQL, data modeling, ETL development, and that's kind of like the core skill set, right? Like focus on those 3-4 topics first, because everything else you're going to build on top of that. Like, yes, you can add in cloud. Yes, you can add in all these other things like distributed systems, Spark, Hadoop, all of that. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of our work is going to be in kind of those core areas. And as technology changes, because, over here, like a lot of people are kind of starting to like push away from Hadoop, or at least, maybe move more to Spark or more managed services of Spark in itself. You might have spent a ton of time learning like MapReduce jobs and all of this, and then you're like, okay, well now it's not there anymore, right? Like this best practice, these concepts are gone, or at least I'm not having to do it the same way. But if you have those core level concepts, like again, coding, SQL, data modeling, data warehousing, those things, when you come up to the new thing, whatever that's going to be in 3 years, you have a baseline to start with. And I think those skills will take you much farther than like, again, all of the fancy skills that everyone's like trying to run after again. So that's how I feel about like when people say, where should I start? It's like, just learn the basics, understand how, work with command line, know how to work with Linux. Like those things I think will take you much farther than, again, some of the like fancier tools that people are coming out with, because all of those tools are built on all the basic stuff that I'm talking about. So,
yeah. And Ben, it would be great if you can answer one more query, because I've been getting this quite often, especially from the experienced candidates, right? So what they used to ask, whether programming is needed for us as well in order to crack the companies. Let's say a candidate having 7, 8 or 10 years of experience. And also they have one more query, like how to get the practical industrial level of experience, because companies won't shortlist their profile unless they have these things in their resumes.
Yeah, and in general, especially if you're just trying to break into data engineering, more than likely you'll be asked programming questions. I think it's often expected especially at like mid levels, because they expect you to do a lot of programming. Obviously, there are other tools now. There's a lot of, and there's always been like low code solutions as well. But I think we're gonna always require some programming as you kind of like. Sometimes when you like go up, and it depends on the company, sometimes you go up and maybe you're just a director. Yeah, maybe they're going to stop asking you as many programming questions. But if they know you're going to have to do programming, they're going to likely ask you, some of those for your interviews. In terms of like how to get experience, usually what I tell people is like, well, I don't know what role you have now, but see if it's possible to do any of this work in your current role, right? Like even if it's like just asking a team like, hey, you guys seem busy, can I do this work, can I try taking on this project, or maybe asking your manager internally, because that's obviously going to be the easiest place, right? Like maybe they won't give you the title, but maybe they'll give you the work, because then that's something you can talk about again, like in your future interview. I think that's generally the best way, because otherwise all you're left with is kind of building projects, which building projects is great, but obviously, like you said, some companies, they want industry experience, and the only way that's going to happen is if you somehow finagle yourself into having someone let you do that. And so that's something I've done in the past, where I've like maybe seen work that I want to do, and I've just been like, hey, can I take on this project? Like what I'll do my normal work and I'll take that on. Like how can we make this work? So I think that's usually the best way if you're already hired and working like as a data analyst, and then maybe figure out how you can like develop an ETL or something. If that's allowed. It's sometimes a struggle. Some companies are very like bureaucratic about these things, I've noticed, where it's like, this team is the only team that makes data pipelines and no one else does it. And then that can be hard. But if you can.
What's the average pay scale of data engineer outside India, and what are the different salary components people use to get top tech hubs, let's say US and America, something?
Yeah. I mean, salaries inside the US. One interesting thing, I don't know if anyone knows this in your audience, but you can actually look at, if you go on like, you look up like H1B salaries, the US has like a database of like all H1B salaries like per person. So you can actually scrape that data and see like, you can't tell who the person is, but it's connected directly to like somebody. It's like, you'll be like, oh, let's go to whatever, Facebook. Oh, there's like 4 H1B cases and here's their salaries. You don't know who they are, but it'll say their salary. So it's just interesting because we legally have to do it, I think, because they were worried that I think people would get taken advantage of otherwise. So they wanted to make sure that if people were coming to the US, that there was a place that they could see other people's salaries at the same job. But in terms of like salaries, right, like if you're like maybe a non-tech company, I think it's not abnormal to be making somewhere in that range of like 80 to 120K, right? Like somewhere in that like high, or starting to break into that 6-figure range. I think then if you start looking at like one of the top tech companies, that's when you start seeing people, doing like maybe 200K or maybe a little more, usually dependent on like stock, right? Like generally the base will still probably be like 120, 150K. Then the next will be like, you might have a 10% bonus, which means you'll get like 10% extra if you do well. So then there's the bonus. And then on top of that, generally there's stock. And then that's going to be the true, like, do you pass that 200K mark? Did your stock do well? Did it not? If it's not doing well, then you're not making that. If it's doing great, then, obviously you have that opportunity to make more, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. Obviously working for a top tech company, you're likely going to have a company that's going to be around for a while, so it's a good chance that it'll be good. I think I had a friend who said he was making upwards of 300 at Lyft, but again, heavily driven by stock. Yeah, it's like wow, and so it's like heavily driven by stock. I think it was like half stock or something. So yeah, in general the base is the same, and then the kicker is always going to be your stock compensation. So.
Given the option to join any FAANG company again, so would you do that, or it's not your preference anymore?
Yeah, I think it's still join a FAANG. I mean, I think there's still value. There's a lot you can learn that isn't just about the technology. I think there's a lot you learn about how to drive business value, how to sell what you're doing. I think one of the hard things about working at a company like any large tech company is there's thousands of other engineers. And so you have to stand out, right? Like if you want to, and that is a skill in itself, right? Like this isn't like if you go work for a company where there's 10 engineers, you're the only person that can solve this problem. And so everyone relies on you. And in a weird way, that's nice, but you don't have to sell yourself. People know that you're the person.
Correct.
When there's, thousands of others of you, and half of them have PhDs, the other have done their own startups and built their own things. You have to figure out a way that's like, how do I drive business value in this situation? Because there's plenty of other people that could do this work. And so that can be hard, but it can also be interesting. It can be fun. It's like, okay, well, what do I bring that's really unique? How do I really, shine in this situation? So I think there's a lot of value there. I think the other place that there's value is what you'll often see, I think, is people will work at a FAANG and then they'll work on a project like maybe, for example, Presto. The Presto team built Presto. And in their case, they had some interesting legal issues, but they decided they wanted to build Presto outside of Facebook, so they kept building it out. They eventually built out Trino because again there was the legal discussion of can they still be called Presto. So now it's Trino, and I think that's the more supported project. And then on top of that, they built Starburst Data that recently got funded for $100 million. So I think that's also an interesting thing. It's like you see how these companies are implementing these technologies, and you're like, hey, externally these technologies don't exist. How do I implement this technology externally, and then maybe try to make a product out of it? So I think there's also that opportunity. So you can learn a lot in terms of like, what are the mature tools that they have here that other companies don't have, and how could I make that into a product? I think is also something that's like an interesting thought.
So guys, Ben has his own YouTube channel named as the Seattle Data Guy, so you should definitely check that out. He's putting amazing content for the data engineering and big data enthusiasts. So the link will be in the description, and also I'll be tagging him in the title. So just follow him, and you will keep on getting some really content. And at the end, that was really great, really informative, Ben, and I really love talking to you. So from my side, a big thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
So that's what I had for you guys in this video. I hope you would have enjoyed this conversation with Ben. If you did, then make sure to like this video in big numbers. And if you're new to my channel, then make sure to subscribe and press the notification icon. I will see you guys in the next weekend with another amazing podcast. Till then, just stay safe, stay home, take care of yourself and your family too.